Flushing, Queens, a neighborhood at the crossroads of change in the early 2000s. A place where cultures collided, businesses thrived, and families sought the American dream. But in one night, all of that was overshadowed by a crime so senseless, so brutal, that it remains one of the darkest chapters in New York history. On May 24th, 2000, in what should have been a routine closing shift, 7 employees of a Wendy's restaurant were bound, gagged, and tragically shot. 5 would not survive. This was not a robbery gone wrong. It was a brutal execution. The mastermind behind it all? John Taylor, a man who had once been the assistant manager at this very restaurant. A man who had hired 2 of his victims and had been trained by another. And a man who planned every step of this crime. Flushing, Queens was not just another New York neighborhood. It was a city within a city, a hub of immigrant culture. In 2000, it was experiencing rapid change. People there hustled through long shifts, earning just enough to keep up with rising rents. Among them were the victims of that fateful night. 40-12 Main Street, the Wendy's where the massacre took place, stood as a familiar landmark to locals. John Taylor had once been the assistant manager here. He had been trained by Gene August. He had even hired 2 of the victims, Ali Ibadat and Anita Smith. But on this night, none of that mattered. John Taylor was 36 years old at the time, with a long history in the fast food industry, eventually becoming assistant manager at this very Wendy's. But he was fired after being caught stealing receipts. He met Craig Godinow, a 30-year-old man with a learning disability, only a month or so prior to the massacre while working at a clothing store in Jamaica, Queens. Taylor told him he was stressed out for money and was going to do something about it. Godinow had insisted they rob livery cab drivers, but Taylor convinced him fast food restaurants were less risk with more reward. On the night of the massacre, Taylor and Godinow took the E train to Roosevelt Avenue, then transferred to the 7 train to Flushing, taking it to the last stop, Main Street. Taylor carried a black plastic bag filled with duct tape, a briefcase for the money, and a loaded .380 caliber semi-automatic pistol, and in a fanny pack, an extra clip of ammunition. At 10:55 p.m., the 2 men entered Wendy's. A bus driver, on his dinner break, saw Taylor, who appeared nervous. He watched as both men ordered food and sat separately. John Taylor joked with Anita Smith, the cashier that night and the only woman present. But beneath the friendly demeanor, Taylor was waiting. When the last customers left and the doors were locked behind them, Taylor made his move. Taylor walked downstairs to the manager's office and pulled the gun, demanding the safe be opened. Gene August complied, handing over $2,400, mostly in coins. Around that time, a phone call interrupted them. It was the girlfriend of 18-year-old employee Jeremy Mele, calling from outside the restaurant to speak to Mele. August, with a gun pointed at him, calmly told her Mele was not available and that she should go home. She had unknowingly called in the middle of the robbery. Gene August's instructions for her to go home likely saved her life. Taylor then ordered August to use the intercom to summon all the employees downstairs, assuring August he would only tie everyone up so that he could make his escape and that no one would be hurt. With Taylor pointing a gun at him, August made the announcement, "Everyone come downstairs, we're having a meeting, it's important." In single file, one by one, they descended into the basement. Anita Smith, ready to go home for the night, had gathered her belongings. She was steps away from freedom, on her way out the door, when Craig Godenow stopped her. She was forced to turn back and join the others. Godenow was later seen on the video surveillance tape walking behind the employees as they walked down the stairs, putting on black gloves that he brought with him and tearing a landline phone off the wall. Once downstairs, all 7 employees' hands were bound, and they were then all walked into the restaurant's stand-up refrigerator. Gene August struggled, managing to loosen his bindings, but Godenow beat him down and duct-taped him tighter. Taylor then grabbed plastic bags and placed them over each of the 7 employees' heads and made them all lay down. He put the gun to August's head and pulled the trigger. Blood filled the plastic bag over Gene August's head. Hearing the gunshot, Anita Smith began to scream. Taylor shot her next. Then he handed the gun to Godenow and told him to finish them off. Godenow ruthlessly executed the remaining employees one by one. Each victim was shot once with a single gunshot to the head, except for Jeremy Melee, who was shot twice, once in the head and once in the torso. 8 shell casings were found at the scene, confirming the calculated nature of the attack. After shooting all 7 victims, Taylor and Godenow quickly ran upstairs and exited the restaurant, taking with them the loot, the video surveillance tape, and locking the doors behind them. They boarded a Q-58 bus carrying the stolen money that barely amounted to a few $100s each. What they did not realize then was that they left witnesses alive. After being shot, Patrick Castro, just 24 years old at the time, and this only having been his 4th day working at the Wendy's, regained consciousness. Miraculously, the bullet that was meant to end his life had only struck him in his right cheek. Feeling a heavy weight on his legs, he realized it was the lifeless body of his co-worker, 40-year-old Ali Ibadat. With blood streaming down his face, he was able to move Ibadat's body off him, calling out, "Is everyone okay? Is everyone okay?" Initially, there was only silence. Castro was able to free himself only to have to hide again, fearing the gunmen were still present and would come back to finish him off. He placed the bag back over his head and waited. Eventually, he heard a noise. It was 18-year-old Jaquan Johnson, the last employee to have been shot. Castro said it looked like Johnson had been beaten up pretty badly, but was trying to smile, realizing he was still alive. Patrick Castro called the police at approximately 12:15 a.m. on May 25th, 2000, about an hour after the massacre began. He was then able to drag Jaquan Johnson up the stairs and sit him down on a chair. Police arrived within minutes. Castro later said he had never been so happy to see police in his life. Police say the very next day, John Taylor went to work as if nothing had happened, like it was just another normal day. And later that evening, the evening of May 25th, he sat at home with his girlfriend and watched the New York Knicks basketball game. The massacre was all over the news almost immediately after it happened. The surviving victim, Patrick Castro, had given descriptions of the attackers. Authorities quickly identified Taylor as a former Wendy's employee who had been fired for theft. His fingerprint was found on a box of plastic bags in the restaurant, further linking him to the crime scene. A bus driver on his break had seen Taylor inside Wendy's that night looking nervous, and a customer who was in the store before closing later identified him in a police lineup. Realizing he was the prime suspect, Taylor fled to his sister-in-law's house in Brentwood, Long Island, about 45 minutes out of the city, in a desperate attempt to evade police. Police detectives quickly placed the home under surveillance. The very next day, on May 26, 2000, 2 days after the murders, a 911 call was placed from that house about a child being injured in a bicycle accident. Suffolk County Police, responding to the call, were shown a photo of Taylor before arriving at the scene. When they got there, they found Taylor inside the house and arrested him without incident. At the time of his arrest, Taylor had the murder weapon, a Branco .380 caliber semi-automatic handgun, still in his fanny pack, along with an extra clip of ammunition, the stolen money, and the Wendy's surveillance tape, which prosecutors later claimed he kept as a trophy. After Taylor was taken into custody, he immediately tried to shift the blame, telling police, "Please get Craig. He's at CSR right now. He's security just like me at 165th and Jamaica Avenue. You know, the Coliseum," referring to the Coliseum Mall. Based on this tip, police located Craig Godinow at work in Jamaica, Queens, and arrested him soon after. Unlike Taylor, Godinow immediately confessed and gave up all the details of the crime. Many critics pointed out that Craig Godinow should have never been free at the time of the Wendy's massacre. He had a long history of violent crimes, and his repeated arrests showed that he was a danger to society. Between 1991 and 1999, Godinow served 3 different prison terms, primarily for armed robberies and drug-related charges, which pointed to a pattern of violent and financially motivated crimes. Despite his repeated incarcerations, he was never classified as a serious enough threat to warrant extended imprisonment. Despite multiple chances for rehabilitation, he continued committing violent robberies. Had he been kept in prison longer, 5 people at Wendy's might still be alive today. As for John Taylor, in recent years he had worked at various McDonald's and Wendy's outlets in Manhattan and Queens. In 1996, he was convicted of burglarizing a McDonald's on 5th Avenue in Manhattan, where he had previously worked. He was sentenced to 5 years probation for that case. The authorities said he robbed or tried to rob 5 fast food restaurants in Queens in an 8-day period in June of 1999. He was caught running away from a $427 robbery on June 23rd, and he was later freed on $3,500 bail. However, he jumped bail and never appeared in court. Craig Godinow pleaded guilty to 5 murders and never faced trial. He was spared the death penalty due to his intellectual disabilities. Craig Godinow was officially sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole on July 18, 2001. During the trial of John Taylor, survivors Patrick Castro and Jaquan Johnson delivered harrowing testimonies that solidified Taylor's role as the mastermind and first shooter in the Wendy's massacre. Castro described how he played dead after being shot, freed himself, and later dragged Johnson out of the basement. He referred to Taylor as the chunky one and the boss, reinforcing Taylor's dominance in the crime. Johnson, who had been shot in the head and suffered lasting injuries, provided an even more chilling account. Resting his head against a box of frozen French fries, Johnson was able to peer out of his loose plastic bag with his right eye, witnessing Taylor fire the first shot, executing manager Gene August. Overcome with terror, he turned away and began praying, unable to watch the rest of the executions unfold. Both survivors' testimonies aligned with forensic evidence, making them crucial for the prosecution. Johnson later recounted the moment he was shot, describing it as feeling like a sledgehammer crushing his skull. He blacked out and later awoke, thinking he had spit out a tooth, only to discover it was the bullet that had traveled from his head into his mouth. His testimony visibly shook the jury, reinforcing the prosecution's case that Taylor was not just an accomplice, but the orchestrator of the massacre. John Taylor was first sentenced to death on October 22, 2002. After being convicted of multiple counts of first-degree murder, he was formally sentenced to death by lethal injection by Judge Randall Ng in Queens Supreme Court. He became the first person in New York State to receive a death sentence since 1976, when the state reinstated capital punishment. Taylor reportedly showed little emotion as the sentence was handed down. Family members of the victims expressed relief, believing justice had been served. However, in 2004, New York's highest court ruled that the state's death penalty statute was unconstitutional. The Queens District Attorney's Office fought to have Taylor's case declared an exception to the decision, but were unsuccessful. As a result, on October 23, 2007, the New York Court of Appeals vacated the death penalty portion of Taylor's verdict. At this time, Taylor was the last remaining inmate on death row in New York. On November 29, 2007, Taylor was resentenced to life without parole for the 5 murders. Born in Haiti, Jean Auguste came to America in search of a better life. Engaged to be married the following year, he had already began planning his wedding and even looking at venues. He worked his way up from a regular employee to store manager at Wendy's. Ambitious and hardworking, he had plans to leave Wendy's and move on to bigger opportunities. Employees respected him as a leader and said he was patient and kind, often stepping in to help out if an employee was struggling. His last act of kindness was trying to reassure the victims that they were only going to be tied up, moments before he was murdered. Anita Smith was 23 years old when she was murdered. She dreamed of becoming a teacher and was passionate about education and wanted to help young children learn. She was working at Wendy's to save money for college and planned to enroll in early childhood education. She was supposed to leave for the night when Gatineau forced her back inside. She was the only female victim and had to endure the terror of witnessing Auguste's execution before she was killed. Her mother, Joan Truman Smith, could not watch the courtroom footage. She had to leave because she saw Anita walking for the last time. Her father broke down in court as prosecutors described how she was stopped at the door, seconds away from freedom. Her family was infuriated that John Taylor was later spared the death penalty. Jeremy Mele was 19 when he was murdered. He was an ROTC student and planned to join the military. He took pride in his discipline and hard work and was looking forward to starting basic training. He was the only victim that was shot twice, once in the head and once in the torso. His mother, Jacqueline Hall, received a letter from John Taylor. She did not believe it was a real apology and threw the letter away, refusing to acknowledge any so-called remorse from Taylor. Mele's family was devastated, knowing he had dreams of serving his country. Ramon Nazario was 44 years old when he was murdered. He was a father who worked hard to provide for his family. He loved Elvis Presley and would often sing Elvis songs at work to make his co-workers laugh. He had been with Wendy's for years and was one of the most experienced employees working that night. His brother, Benjamin Nazario, attended every court session. He strongly opposed any leniency for John Taylor and was outraged when Taylor was spared the death penalty. His family demanded justice, saying Ramon never deserved to die that way. Ali Ibadat was 40 years old when he was murdered. He was originally from Pakistan and worked long hours to send money back home to his family. He had been hired by John Taylor, never imagining the man who gave him a job would later execute him. He rarely complained at work and was known as a quiet, dedicated worker. His family in Pakistan never fully recovered, as they were heavily dependent on his assistance. His death left them struggling, and they blamed Taylor for taking away their provider. Patrick Castro survived being shot that night. For a long time, he suffered PTSD and found it difficult to move past the horrific experience. At one point, he was offered the opportunity to receive a new identity, but refused, preferring to keep his name, identity, and to remain himself. He was credited for saving Jaquan Johnson's life. In interviews, he described being haunted by the sounds of gunshots and the feeling of bodies collapsing around him. Jaquan Johnson was only 18 when he was shot in the head and miraculously survived. He underwent brain surgery and had a long recovery process. Initially, he refused to talk about the crime because it was too painful. Eventually, he testified in court and helped convict Taylor and got him out. Nearly 20 years after the massacre, he authored the novel 40th in Maine, based on the Wendy's massacre. Johnson recounts the harrowing events of that fateful night, the circumstances leading up to the mass shooting, and his journey of recovery after being shot in the head. Please find a link to the book in the description below. The Wendy's massacre wasn't just a robbery gone wrong. It was a calculated execution, a night of pure terror that left 5 people dead and 2 others forever haunted. John Taylor planned the crime. He carried it out with cold precision, and yet he is still alive. His victims, their dreams, and their futures are not.